Oh, I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Lung Cancer Living Room, where we will be talking about the path to lung cancer research funding and a call to action. Welcome to those of you who are able to join us during our live lung Cancer Living Room, and welcome to those of you who will be watching the post-live meeting. I'm Danielle Hicks. For those of you who may not know me, I am Chief Patient Officer here at GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer. And for those of you who are new and may not be familiar with our Living Room program, it's a support and education series that we created with the patients in mind, specifically people living with lung cancer and their loved ones, their caregivers, and the lung cancer community as a whole, with the goal of really bringing to you live and in real time educational talks from key opinion leaders, some of whom you will meet tonight on our panel in the lung cancer community, and really in a format and in a language that's hopefully easy for everyone to understand. This evening's discussion, as some of you may have already seen, is really framed to help people who, like me, are maybe not well versed in this area of government affairs and policy and federal funding, to really understand how federal research funding happens, primarily how the congressionally directed medical research program, which we will fondly call the Cdmrp throughout this program, works, how it works, and some of the nuances, including its unique inclusion of patient advocates through the program cycle, how the funds that support the Cdmrp are invested to best support both the needs of the research and patient communities. And importantly as well, we're going to discuss how you can help us, this call to action, how you can help us with your voices to move the needle forward and increase federal funding for lung cancer research. So thank you again for joining us tonight. We have first up Dr. Marilena McGuire, who is the Program Director, Lung Cancer Research Program, Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. We have our very own go-to team member, Elridge Proctor, MPA. She's Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Foundation. We have Jim Pantelis, who, for those of you who are veterans to this program, will recognize him as a survivor and advocate. He's on the GoTo Foundation Lung Cancer National Ambassador Council and a past participant in living room programs. And then we have Elizabeth DeJong, who is a survivor advocate and on the GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer Voices Summit Planning Committee. You're going to hear a little bit more about the Voices Summit coming up. So we are going to jump right in, and we're going to start with Elridge, and we're going to talk a little bit about GoTo. And our history with lung cancer research funding. So, Elridge, what is GoTo's history with lung cancer research funding? And can you talk a little bit about what has been your work, GoTo's work, the community's work with increasing lung cancer funding?
So the GoTo Foundation works actively to increase both public and private research funding. GoTo started advocating directly for increased research funding at the National Cancer Institute at the NIH. Then in 2008, under the former name Lung Cancer Alliance, GoTo Foundation established a dedicated research pipeline known as the Lung Cancer Research Program that is within the congressionally directed medical research programs administered by the Department of Defense. I joined GoTo, I may have shared this about 5 years ago, and within the 5 years, my work has been in increasing and developing a number of GoTo's legislative initiatives, which includes increasing research funding. And my approach sort of has been to reestablish the Congressional Lung Cancer Caucus each new Congress in order to have champions to lead our research funding request. Within the past 2 years, our efforts has been on restoring the funding level of 20 million, which is what the lung cancer research program was established with. When I arrived, it was clear that the program had been cut in half, I would say within the first 2 years of its establishment. And so it became a critical focus to bring restoration back at the $20 million level. To date, our efforts have been towards increasing research funding so that we could establish new historic levels for the lung cancer research program, which is why GoTo stands proudly with the community of advocates today in making an ask of $60 million for the lung cancer research program. We have secured the caucus chair, Representative Brendan Boyle, to lead the ask of $60 million for this year's funding request. As many of you know, and you have been a part of this process, annually, Congressman Brendan Boyle leads and circulates a Dear Colleague letter asking your representatives to sign on in support of his ask. Well, this year, the focus and the ask will be of the $60 million. Another way or example that I'd like to highlight that GoTo works to increase research in lung cancer is through a process known as report language. Report language is simply explanatory statements that accompany the funding bill. And in doing so, the committee is able to speak directly to research agencies with statements that are encouraging, that give direction in increasing research on lung cancer. And it can address a number of topics from preventive services to women and lung cancer, to even looking at survivorship, making sure that research is being done across all subtypes of lung cancer to increase survivorship, not just in small cell, but across all types. And I think a good example of how this has been effective too is through proposed legislation. GoTo was instrumental in passing the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act in 2013. And what that did is it pretty much required the NIH to develop a research framework on small cell lung cancer. But Congress did this without providing new or increased funding to the agency. It simply required and mandated that it be done, and it required the NIH to use existing funds. And so GoTo was successful in doing it back then, and we're trying to do this again through the Women in Lung Cancer Research and Preventive Services Act, where we're trying to increase research in areas to build our understanding in lung cancer in areas where there is a gap, but also requiring coordination of agencies and increasing the level of research without new money, but through the existing pot. Because annually we advocate for NIH research funding, CDC, NCI, FDA, all the research agencies. And so these are just prime examples of how GoTo historic leadership and continued work in increasing research funding continues today.
You mentioned in that conversation the Lung Cancer Caucus. Can you explain to the folks what a Congressional Lung Cancer Caucus is?
Sure. I'm going to do it in a very simple way. All of us are familiar with membership organizations. Well, that's what a caucus is. It's a congressional membership organization, or in other words, a group of members of Congress will come together and convene to discuss a particular issue or to achieve a common goal. A great example is the Congressional Lung Cancer Caucus. Again, it was established by GoTo Foundation and former Congressman Rick Nolan. And the caucus today serves sort of as a clearinghouse to aid members in their understanding of lung cancer issues.
Along with this caucus, we need Congressional Lung Cancer Champions. Can you talk a little bit about what we mean by Congressional Lung Cancer Champions and how we develop them?
So congressional champions are who, to get any work done, to propose any type of legislative initiatives, you need a sponsor. And that sponsor is the individual member of Congress who will then take the charge, lead that, and make the request for you, the constituent or the organization or the community. How we or you individually would go about developing a champion is really through consistent advocacy. You do this in a few ways, through annual meetings with your representatives, consistent communication that would include making telephone calls, sending emails, follow-up letters, just any one of those touch points. We make it very easy at the GoTo Foundation, where advocates can simply go to our website, and just with the click of your mouse, you can easily send an email, you can send a tweet, you can share a story with your representatives just using the tool on our platform. And then another way is simply by joining us for real life action. I actually would like to personally put out an invitation for anyone interested in advocacy to join us and register for our summit May 16th through May 17th. This gives you an opportunity to participate in pre-arranged meetings with your representatives. We will schedule all the appointments for you, provide you with the tools, the training, all the specifics that you need to be a strong advocate in making the ask for the $60 million. And really, that's just how you go about it. If you choose not to join us at the summit and you'd like to try to develop champions on your own, you would simply need to contact your representative and ask them for their process, find out how you can engage with them, how to go about to schedule an appointment and follow their processes. And in doing so, you can also send a letter, share your personal stories, but just be sure you provide the data points to make the connection, to develop the relationship, and to get their support. And make sure you make an ask, because without that, they don't know what to do. So you've got to be clear on what exactly you need them to do. Otherwise, that's just how we go about it. And the Lung Cancer Caucus is a great example of how GoTo develops champions.
What I want you to sort of express or reiterate next, Elridge, is like the benefit in banding together and creating this army, if you will, within the lung cancer community for these asks. Why is that important? What's the benefit of having these voices?
Sure. The benefit of working together is the success, right? We share in the disappointment together, but working together, we also share in the success. Members of Congress like for groups to work together and come to them with one ask. I would say the benefit of this community working together is knowing that each of you can be the cure. And so working together is the cure. I personally have always stressed the power of our community, that when we're together, when we advocate with one voice, how strong our community is. The state of our community can be quite strong working together. And so therefore, I think we each need to work at providing a face to lung cancer, the face that you give, the face you represent, making sure that there is a face of a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a daughter, a child, a neighbor, and making sure that their stories are told, your story is shared. Members of Congress need constituent stories to underscore the need in their district, in their state, in the country, and understanding that when we create that national impact for them, that is what underscores the why. Why is lung cancer a national priority? Why does lung cancer deserve immediate attention? Why does lung cancer need and deserve increased funding, but not just one time? It needs consistent increases in research funding.
Fantastic point, Elridge. We need those voices and those faces. We can speak on your behalf, but we aren't walking in your shoes. So it is so very important. Marilena, we're going to turn to you, and we're going to focus primarily on the Cdmrp and the LCRP. We know that the NIH and the Cdmrp are the two largest funders of lung cancer research. Can you talk a little bit for us tonight about the type of research that the Cdmrp funds?
Thank you very much for the question. This is definitely a question that we often get, or asking about, well, what's the difference between Cdmrp and its grant funding versus that of the NIH and NCI, National Cancer Institute. So at Cdmrp, we like to say that the research we support is purposeful. We're not funding research for research's sake, but we're using research as a tool to get to the answer. In this case, of course, we're talking treatment and ideally a cure for lung cancer. We are acquiring knowledge and material products that we're going to use to address the gaps in care for patients or consumers. And I'd like to give a little definition when I say consumers. What I'm talking about is a consumer is referring to an individual who is affected by a particular disease. Obviously, in this case, for the LCRP, it's lung cancer. The other programs at Cdmrp may be other cancers. It could be an injury. We're talking, unfortunately, from our service members abroad, spinal cord injuries, PTSD, and the like. Depending on the program, it has slightly different definitions. So for the LCRP, a consumer is a survivor or a person living with lung cancer. We feel it's very important to have that representation within the program, and they're involved at all levels, which I'll talk about a little further. So Cdmrp has a unique funding process that not only benefits researchers because we look to approve funding from really cutting edge ideas in the field that other research funders might shy away from because they're pretty risky and perhaps don't have a lot of what we refer to as preliminary data. It's just, but it's out of the box thinking many times, and it's, if proven possible, then it could really move the field forward, make significant steps forward. But also what we look to fund also involves serving the needs of consumers, those who are actually affected by the diseases. So as I mentioned, consumers are involved at all steps of Cdmrp's program cycle, and that's something that's very unique to Cdmrp. The involvement of consumers does not stop after advocating to Congress for funding for a particular program. That's not the only place. Once a program like LCRP receives their an appropriation or funding from Congress, then the program is going to meet with what we refer to as our programmatic panel. And I would say the programmatic panels is the equivalent of, say, a board of directors. This group is going to develop what the program goals will be for the year. We meet every year, and so we're very flexible and we adapt to what is the current state of the science right now, not 2 or 3 years ago, sort of every year. And when the panel meets, they will develop an investment strategy for the monies the programs receive. So what grant funding opportunities are we going to offer, and what types of grants are going to help us best accomplish the goals we've set forward for the year. So on this programmatic panel, there are several consumers who sit and are part of the programmatic panel, have an equal voice with the scientists and clinicians that also serve on the panel. So how does this work after okay, this is your investment strategy, and we put out our funding opportunities. So once Cdmrp receives applications in response to these funding announcements, we use what we refer to as a 2-tier process for evaluating them. And both of tiers involve a dynamic interaction between scientists and consumers. So the first tier is the evaluation at a scientific peer review, the scientific merit, the technical merit of the application. And then the second tier is the review by the programmatic panel. The programmatic panel will look at the applications and compare them to one another, as well as how well do these applications, how strong is the scientific merit, what's the potential impact of the project if it's successful. And impact is a very big, important criteria, because we want to make sure that what we're funding, how is it going to affect ultimately the users of that research. And it's not just the scientists, but it is ultimately the consumers. So those are the things that the programmatic panel will take into consideration when they make their funding recommendations about what applications they think we should fund and that would best meet the goals of the program. And so I think we all know that there are many gaps in our knowledge when it comes to lung cancer, and that there's a substantial amount of work that needs to be done in order to address this disease and treat it. So what LCRP's strategic priorities are seek to address an important gap in the funding of lung cancer research. And this is specifically the seeding of new and innovative ideas that once they're proven, that they can proceed toward what we say further translational development. So start moving those ideas forward so that they can ultimately move forward to sort of type of clinical trial testing. And this oftentimes is going to be funded by the NIH, the NCI, because it becomes more and more expensive to do the more advanced research studies. And the LCRP does try. We definitely want to be involved in funding some of these more advanced type research projects, including clinical trials. But that, again, is dictated by the funding that we have available. We have a limited pot of money, and we're trying to make the biggest bang for the buck and fit into a niche that is really needed. And we found this is definitely an area, these very early stage, innovative, high risk, but high impact type projects is a great area for us, the LCRP, to fit into, and then also try and fund some more advanced stage research.
That was a wildly informative answer, and again, something that's very helpful to me. And you actually answered what my next question was going to be about, the relationship between the LCRP, Cdmrp, and NIH, NCI. So that was beautiful. So before we get into how the money actually gets into these funds, I want to talk a little bit about how it all started, the history of the Cdmrp. So if we could pull up that history slide, and kind of if you could walk us through that at a high level for even a deeper understanding.
Cdmrp was actually established back in 1992. So we are now approaching 30 years. And it was really founded based on a grassroots advocacy efforts that heightened the political awareness and increased interest in health issues. So based on these grassroots advocacy efforts, and they were actually initially by the breast cancer advocacy community, and this led to an initial congressional appropriation of $210 million for a new breast cancer research program. And this breast cancer research program, it wasn't sent to the NIH. It was actually designated to the United States Army Medical Research and Development Command, and I'll refer to it as USA MRDC. Part of the reason it was directed to the Army is it was seen that there were meetings both with the NIH and the Army, and in this case, the Army was seen to be much more flexible in terms of making adjustments from year to year to year, because that's the way the program was going to receive money. And the NIH, what it does extremely well. But they have their process, and we're really, the advocates were really looking for a slightly different process, so to basically increase the likelihood of finding better treatments and ultimately a cure for breast cancer. So once the Army received, our USA MRDC received these funds, they sought the advice of the National Academy's Institute of Medicine, I'll refer to it as IOM, about how to most effectively manage, review, and investment strategies for these appropriations. So what the IOM recommended was, one, to use a two-tier review process, which that incorporates the strengths of a traditional peer review, technical scientific evaluation of the application, but also to consider the relevance to programmatic goals. What is the program trying to achieve? What are their goals each year? And to take that into consideration too, not just the scientific technical merit. And the other part was to have consumer advocates participate in both tiers of the review process. So along the entire way. So from developing investment strategies and focus areas and goals for the program, through the process of reviewing the applications, and then ultimately at that second tier, assisting in making the recommendations of what applications to fund. So the success of that initial program, the breast cancer research program, the BCRP, led to additional programs and topics actually being added by Congress to be managed by the Cdmrp. And then that's how it really became established. And it went from one program to 4, 5, 6, to the point now that we have infrastructure and manage over 35 programs, in addition to supporting other core efforts within the Department of Defense. So Congress has found that the management processes that are used by Cdmrp, they're very well regarded, and we always receive high praises for the work that's being done, and that's why we see continued support for these Cdmrp programs.
Marilena, you talked about the BCRP, the Breast Cancer Research Program, and that $210 million. Let's talk a little bit about how the money gets there, and what maybe budgets and funding cycles are, and what the role really of these advocates are in the process.
Okay, well, I think one of the biggest points I'd like to make, and we at Cdmrp, we always need to point out, is that the funding for Cdmrp programs are actually not part of the Department of Defense budget that is submitted by the president. So, the funds that support Cdmrp programs are actually added by Congress to the Department of Defense budget after it receives it from the president's office. So this type of funding that's added by Congress is called Congressional Special Interest, or CSI acronyms. And it is the government, we love acronyms. CSI funding. So the next thing is, I know many people are not always all that familiar with the budgeting for the federal government, and how do our funding cycles occur? What calendar do we use? So we don't follow the typical calendar year. We're going from January through December, and instead we follow what is called the fiscal year. So the fiscal year for the federal government, it starts 1 October and goes through 30 September of the next year. So this means, for example, for fiscal year 2022, it started back on 1 October 2021, and it will go through 30 September of 2022. So if Congress does not pass a budget before 1 October, for example, we are in this situation right now. The FY22 budget, it was not passed before the 1st of October last year. So in order to keep the government running, the Congress has to pass what they call a continuing resolution that provides funds for the government, and the amount of those funds are actually based on the last fiscal year's levels. And I'm not going to get into any further detail than that, but I think another key point here when there's a continuing resolution is the fact that in this situation, Cdmrp does not receive funding since the money is CSI, that's Congressional Special Interest, and so it was never part of the original president's budget, and that's what is involved when they pass a continuing resolution. So we really need a budget to be passed in order to have the monies to support these programs. So we are now patiently awaiting signature on the FY22 budget. Since the federal government operates under this fiscal year calendar, I do want to note to all the advocates listening tonight or the recording that make sure you understand that when you go to Congress now in 2022, this year, and you're advocating for funding for the LCRP, that this request is actually going to be for the fiscal year 2023 budget, which would start 1st of October of this year. I know it's it can get confusing, it's the overlap, but that's the basics of it.
Can you explain the difference between the PRCRP and the LCRP, and can lung cancer be included in both?
Sure. So actually, thank you for mentioning about what is called the Peer-Reviewed Cancer Research Program, or PRCRP. This program is a bit different than some of the other cancer programs where instead of it focusing on just one particular cancer, like we have the lung cancer research program, instead it covers a variety of different cancers that do not already have a separate research program that's managed by Cdmrp. So there are topics for this program, and these topics are determined by Congress each year. So the topics can change from year to year, and some continue every single year. Sometimes some of the topics in this program actually move out and become a standalone research program. So for example, kidney cancer used to be a topic in PRC. It is now its own research program. The melanoma also was a topic in the peer-reviewed cancer program and has a standalone research program managed by Cdmrp. So the congressional language for the PRCRP is very specific, and it states that it's providing funding for research into cancers not addressed in the breast, kidney, lung, pancreatic, prostate, ovarian, rare cancer, and melanoma research programs. So that means any of those cancers that have their own research program, those applications need to go specifically to those programs, not to the peer-reviewed cancer research program. So within PRC, do want to point out that all the cancer topics, they are all competing for funding within that program. So that program has, last year it had 20 topics. So all 20 topics were competing for funding in that program. And there's no set amount that, okay, we need to invest so much money per topic. There is every effort made to fund applications in all topics, but that certainly they want to fund high quality science. So there's no guarantee that every single topic is going to receive funding.
I want to jump back to fiscal year 2021, and talk a little bit about, on average, is it average? How many applications do you receive a year, and what percentage might get funded?
The last year, typically this program has been receiving well over, say 300, 350 applications. And so this last year, we actually received a total of 368 applications, and we were able to fund 37. So this unfortunately means that there's still many excellent to outstanding applications that the LCRP received, but we were just not able to fund them due to, money limitations. We have a set appropriation and we can only fund so much, research. So to give you a perspective, there were 119 applications that scored in the excellent to outstanding range for scientific merit from peer review. 70% of them were not funded. So there's a lot of very good, potentially excellent, outstanding research out there. We just don't have the monies to support all of it, or a bigger portion of it. I'm not saying we're going to fund everything, but yeah, it's definitely very challenging.
how many or what percentage, if you can, of funded projects move on and advance to clinical trials?
That is a very sort of challenging, step to go from, since one, we tend to fund more of these early stage projects. So they're many steps away from that step to, okay, some sort of clinical clinical application testing. But we have had over the years, at least 10 projects, the results of the research sort of support a rationale to do some clinical trial testing. In fact, there is actually, as I said, we do try and fund some clinical trials or advanced research when we have the monies available. And there was a clinical trial, very early stage, phase 1 trial that we supported. It was led by Dr. Karen Kelly, and that the results of that trial were very promising. So it is now actually moved forward to a phase 3 clinical trial that is supported by the NCI. So that next step. And this trial is actually examining the benefit of using Tecentriq, an immunotherapy against PD-L1 as a target, combining it with stereotactic body radiation, SBRT, in non-small cell lung cancer patients who have inoperable stage 1 and 2A tumors. So, we do have projects that's ultimately we'd like to see the impact of it moving to touching those with lung cancer. So, having 10 projects go there, it's like it's fantastic, because it's, as I say, you fill the funnel. You keep putting in as many projects as you can to have enough eggs in your basket, so to speak, that will ultimately lead to some very promising results.
Are there other Cdmrp research studies being done that might not be specific to LCRP, but would ultimately benefit lung cancer?
The answer I'd say is yes. In fact, Cdmrp has a number of research programs that are entirely focused on developing solutions to health problems linked to exposure to harmful environments or agents. In fact, in the FY22 budget, there's a new program, Toxic Exposure Research Program, that will be, standing up when that budget gets signed. So some of these programs that are funding research that could ultimately lead to knowledge that will be useful for lung cancer include the Gulf War Illness Research Program. We have a program called the Joint Warfighter Medical Research Program, military burn, and neurotoxin exposure treatment for Parkinson's. And again, as I mentioned, this very, very new program that hasn't even started yet, but again, it's focusing on toxic exposures and the conditions, diseases that can develop from that. So yes, they definitely have.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's another segue into what is almost the last question, but a very important point. And that's the diagnosis rate of our service members and our veterans. Can you talk a little bit about that diagnosis rate and why this type of research is important to the lung cancer community as a whole?
The graphic is showing you sort of the numbers, incidence of lung cancer within the military health system. So first, we see estimates from the Veterans Administration, the VA, that there are over 900,000 veterans that actually remain at risk for lung cancer, either due to age, a smoking history, or other environmental exposures during and after military service. So that's one portion. The graphic then also shows military health system medical encounters. So actually going in, seeing the doctor for a potential diagnosis of lung cancer and actually having been diagnosed, treatment for lung cancer. And the numbers I'm going to give you cover a span from 2010 to 2019, collecting this data. So combined between active service members, so those are on active duty, as well as other DoD beneficiaries, which include retirees, veterans who are seeking their health care through TRICARE or a medical treatment facility, not the VA medical system, spouses, family members, as well as reservists. They also, these are all the beneficiaries within the military health system. So in that sort of 10-year time period, they saw over 130,000 individuals coming in and being diagnosed with lung cancer. The next sort of piece of data that we have is that there was over 2.7 million outpatient encounters within the military health system for lung cancer. Over 2.7 million. That there's a cost associated with that, and that's certainly something that the military would like to try and address, because they want to make sure they can take care of their the service members and their beneficiaries. One last piece of data we have is hospital bed days. So people who have been diagnosed with lung cancer, and then of course having to be hospitalized for treatment. And during that time period, there was almost 500,000 hospital bed days due to a diagnosis of lung cancer and treatment. So within the military health system, and that's just one small portion of all the individuals within the United States who are being diagnosed with lung cancer and receiving treatment. So it is definitely something that the military health system wants to address, not alone, as well as the entire general public.
Now that we've got sort of the nuts and bolts of the how and the why and what this process sort of looks like, I want to jump into this advocacy space. So, Jim, we can start with you. It would be great. And if you could talk to us a little bit about what types of advocacy activities that you engage in.
I'm involved in patient advocacy at just about every level that Elridge and Mary Elena mentioned. If anything, I do peer review at the MISHAR level, which is the state level that's funded by NIH, that does proof of concept research, clinical research. That then is typically the type of stuff that we want to prove that at the bench level, this is what's happening molecularly with this cancer and how it responds to this. It creates a proof of concept that can then go on to an organization like LCRP or the Cdmrp programs. And I do peer review there. I also am really active at the NIH NCI level because I'm a member of, or I was until December 31st, I was a member of their CIRBs. I was a primary on their adult late stage or late emphasis board, which is their single largest IRB, and I was an alternate on the adult early stage. Over the course of my 6 years there, I watched lung cancer research grow from about 5% of our involvement. And when I say our involvement, the work that we actually reviewed, the studies that we did continuing reviews on and the like. Back in 2016, my involvement saw a little over 5% of our effort was specific to lung cancer. By the time I wrapped up in 2021, we were over 26% of our effort was related to lung cancer. And I guess one of the things that I want to say here is that we are getting more funding. We're getting a lot more research headed our way. I think one of the things that we need to do is to keep the funding, especially at the Cdmrp level, growing, because we're attracting more and more researchers to our field. As Jamie Stotts puts it, we're the cool kids on the block because we're starting to see a lot of meaningful results. So we're attracting the best and the brightest in the research world, in the young research world, to look at lung cancer. When 10 years ago, all they wanted, they knew that there was no funding in lung cancer, so they were going off and doing everything but lung cancer. NCI in 2020 spent over $377 million specifically on lung cancer research. $377 million is a lot. It's a drop in the bucket from what we should want, but it's growing. We need to keep it growing. I think one of my biggest frustrations is that we spend time looking at pennies when what we really need is we need a 5-year, probably $25 billion effort to cure lung cancer. And we need it across the board. We need it at the proof of concept level. We need it at bench science. We need it at clinical research. And I think we're headed there.
Your message here is sort of demystifying the funding, because you're right. I think most people do look to the LCRP as, well, that's all that's going to lung cancer. And I know that you personally in our community look deep at the LCRP and believe wholly that it is underfunded and want to work towards increasing the funding in that space. But you've talked, and I think you've made a really good point, that we are more successful than we think, and that there is more hope than we think. The sort of non-tangible or not, at the ready information is there. And you pointed out, the 2020 funding from NCI at $377 million. And I think you told me the NIH was around $447 million dedicated to lung cancer. And that does not include some of this ancillary science. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with what that is?
Well, and the ancillary sciences are the studies that are solid tumor related, or the studies that relate to SBRT, that show processes that work in a larger number of cancers where lung cancer is part of the study but not the emphasis of the study. SBRT, the money that went into SBRT science did not come from the lung cancer budget, right? It came from science budgets, but it has a huge impact on stage 1 and stage 2 lung cancers.
I do want to get to Elizabeth and ask you similar questions, starting with your approach and your own, advocacy journey and what kind of activities that you engage in.
My advocacy journey started very grassroots in the sense that my husband and I did a local 5K and raised money for that portion, research portion of it. And that the next year that 5K was done away with. And I reached out to a good friend of mine who works for a pharmaceutical company in patient advocacy. And I said, I feel like my story isn't done as it relates to advocacy within the lung cancer community. I know you're not in the lung cancer community, but what would you recommend? And she actually connected me with, at that point, Lung Cancer Alliance, now GO2. And I got involved on a number of different levels, but primarily participated in that first on-site summit that I participated in. And Elridge was my partner in crime as we approached my representatives, and just seeing the value in putting a face to lung cancer that is different than the face that everybody equates to lung cancer. When I was diagnosed, I was 47 years old. I was active, and in meeting with one of the representatives, watching her face and the realization that I was her daughter's age when I was diagnosed, and that I could have easily been her daughter, and it could have been a very different story. And making that connection, it was from that point on, it was an easy sell for me in terms of maintaining my advocacy within the community and being able to share my story, and to put a name and a face to lung cancer for everybody who can't, or is maybe just a little too shy, or insert whatever reason. And so that is how I got started, how I've stayed with it. But one of my passion points in terms of discussion, and it's kind of twofold. One is, and feeding off of what Jim talked about in terms of stigma. I used to introduce myself as stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, non-smoking. And I realized that I was perpetuating that stigma myth when I did that. And that as much as I wanted to kind of cut off those questions from people who might question, like, do you know why you got cancer, or that sort of thing, that to help the lung cancer community, I simply needed to introduce myself as a lung cancer patient, non-small cell lung cancer, and just not even talk about whether I had a smoking history or not, because if we identify as non-smoking lung cancer, we perpetuate that myth that those that smoked had any choice or control over this any more than I did. And so, I think that we need to be very conscious as we advocate. We need to be aware of the language that we're using with that. So that's one of my passion points. The other passion point that I have, and it goes to this idea of we have become so scientifically advanced, both in lung cancer and in other cancers and in other diseases, that we've been able to really drill down and get into those cancer cells and really create a profile for those cancer cells, which is wonderful, and it helps with diagnosis and with treatment, but it doesn't help when we're advocating. We don't need to be ALK positive. We don't need to be EGFR, PD-L1. We don't need to break down that to those base levels. When we hear other cancers talk about and advocate for themselves, they don't break down to those levels. We hear people talk about very high level breast cancer. You don't hear advocates for funding for breast cancer talk about HER2 positive or BRCA 1 or 2. They kind of leave that at the door when they come in for advocacy. And we need to do that when it comes to lung cancer as well. We need to reduce those silos, come together as one, and that's how we're going to keep pushing forward for this 60 million or 250 billion, whatever. Jim, what did you ask for? 25 billion? Whatever that is that we're asking for, that's how we're going to push those forward, is by presenting a unified front. So those are my passion points. I think in terms of what can GoTo do and how can GoTo help people advocate and find their voice, I can't think of an organization that makes it any easier. Elridge has done, and her staff and everybody with GoTo have done a tremendous job of putting together talking points, whether you're on site or virtually on site, participating in the summit and meeting with your representatives. If you are calling them on the phone and speaking with them, if you're showing up and meeting with them for a prearranged meeting in their office, in their home district, if you're sending them a letter, GoTo has all of those resources right there for you, that you can stay very broad and go with the very general information that they provide, or you can make it much more personal and add your story to it as well. And so for those of you that are just getting started with advocacy and don't really know where to start, this is a great way to do it. It's all right there for you. It's very clearly laid out. And then I would say that for me, the most important point that I would say probably isn't as clearly in writing, because GoTo tries to be very respectful of our time as advocates. But I would say we as advocates need to take the time to then follow up, and they keep your story in their head so that when those funding opportunities come in front of them, it's not just a lung cancer line item, it's your story in front of them.
All I would add is that I've been going on the Hill, started with Lung Cancer Alliance. I've been doing it for a while. And one of the most meaningful things for me is how prevalent this disease is. Almost everybody that you meet with has their own lung cancer story. They lost an aunt, they lost a father, they know somebody that was meaningful to them that died. And getting them to talk about that while also incorporating your stories so that you're making sure that they know that this is survivable and that it's only survivable if they support it. It's really important. Andy Levin is new in Congress. He's the son of Sander Levin. He's the nephew of Carl Levin. Carl Levin just died of lung cancer, right? AOC's dad died at the age of 41 from lung cancer. Everybody that you meet there has their own stories. We're not the outliers anymore. And I guess that's the story that I would want to take to the Hill every time I go, because I've survived 16 years now. Now, I have lost a lot of friends to this wicked disease, but I've made more. So we just need to show them that it is survivable and that they need to support us and that we need their help.
Thank you both so very much for bringing your voices here tonight and for being champions in this space and helping us to recruit and explain all of this. Mary Elena, you as well. Thank you so much for your detailed information on this process and how it works, and for really bringing it down to a lay level that folks can understand. Elridge, as always, it's a pleasure. You're a superstar. You know what you're talking about, and you do it so beautifully and articulately. So thank you. Thank you all again so very much. All of our panelists, all of you watching live, or those coming back to watch post-live, Penn Media on the back end, the entire GoTo team who work tirelessly in different areas to bring not only this type of programming to you, but different programs such as the Voices Summit, which we heard so much about tonight. And then I would be remiss in not thanking our supporters. Without their support, we could not bring you this and other programming. So Amgen, AstraZeneca, Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Daiichi Sankyo, Eisai, I always mess that up, Foundation Medicine, Genentech, Merck, Mirati Therapeutics, Novartis, Regeneron, Sanofi, and Takeda. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you next month.
Oh, I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.